More now on our top story this Newsday. The Treasurer being criticised for derogatory comments about the US Republican Party. For some analysis, let's go now to our Sydney CBD studio, where American politics expert Dr. David Smith from the Sydney University's US Studies Centre joins me. David Smith, thanks very much for being again a guest of ours on Newsday. Now, look, we saw in Kieran Gilbert's report those comments from the Treasurer labelling sections of the Republican Party cranks and crazies. What impact could this have with our relations with the White House? Is it overstretching it to say that it's going to damage those if Mitt Romney indeed wins the presidential election?
Yeah, well, it's worth noting that he wasn't actually talking about Mitt Romney. And so this isn't like those comments that John Howard made about Barack Obama or the comments that Mark Latham made about George W. Bush, where they were talking about a specific president or presidential candidate. He's talking about the Tea Party. And so it's unlikely that anyone's actually going to respond to this from the US. And I think that the Tea Party part of the Republican Party already has such a dim view of the world outside of the United States and is notoriously bad at drawing distinctions between countries outside of the United States, that this will just confirm their expectations that the rest of the world is a dark socialist hole. So I don't think that this is actually going to have any great effect on relations between the Australians and the Americans.
Well, it would be fair to say that the Tea Party has been called worse, wouldn't it?
It would be fair to say that, and in fact what Wayne Swan has said is pretty much a mainstream belief outside the United States of America. I don't know if it's entirely fair. I don't think that the Tea Party holds the sole responsibility for the state of the United States economy or the failure to recover. But outside the US, it's a pretty widely held view that the Tea Party has pushed the Republican Party, which has pushed the United States government into a fairly intractable position regarding its own debt and deficit, which are problems that it could probably solve if there was the political will to cooperate.
So, I mean, we've got Tony Abbott saying that Wayne Swan should be bigger than making these kind of comments about the Republicans, but really, so you just expect it to go back and forth probably today, and then really there'll be not much more of this argument.
That's right. I mean, it's worth noting that no coalition figure has come out and said, well, actually, I think that Tea Party economic policy is great and you should threaten to send your country into default because you don't want to raise taxes at all. All the coalition figures have said are basically grow up, concentrate on Australian politics rather than American politics. So I think this could have a really short shelf life. This is not like where a presidential candidate or a president actually develops a bad relationship with someone in the Australian government, which can be a lot worse. And I mean, we've seen this before. Richard Nixon, for example, really hated Gough Whitlam, and the feeling was mutual. And I think that actually did damage Australian-American relations during this period. But Wayne Swan's talking about a group of people in the United States Congress, and I don't think it's going to have very long-term ramifications.
And it would be fair to say that Mitt Romney's got more on his mind and more worries this week than, say, Wayne Swan's comments.
That's absolutely right. I mean, there is so much going on in the US news cycle at the moment where it seems it's difficult for Mitt Romney to say the right thing at the moment, and he is also facing this situation where he appears to be permanently behind in the polls. So Romney and the rest of the congressional Republicans whose electoral fortunes are to some extent tied to Mitt Romney are probably not paying a lot of attention to what's going on in Australia.
Just briefly, David, what did you make of the US issuing a warning to its citizens to exercise caution on the streets of Sydney this weekend?
Yeah, this is a fairly standard and actually fairly low-level warning issued by the State Department, just as a precautionary measure to show that it's keeping its citizens safe. Where there's actual real danger to the United States citizens, you tend to find that these warnings are exercised in much stronger terms, where they will actually tell people to avoid certain places or to avoid certain cities or not to travel to the country at all. So this isn't some high-level kind of security alert. This is just a fairly reasonable precaution taken by the State Department.
Dr. David Smith from the US Studies Centre at Sydney University, always good to talk to you. Thanks very much.
My pleasure.
It is about